The sound of gunfire echoed through the church just as the choir exhaled their final note. But this wasn't some street crime or random act of violence. It wasn't even a robbery gone wrong. This was something much more chilling. A poised, immaculately dressed woman had calmly raised her weapon and fired, right in front of the entire congregation. The target? Her own son. But what nobody in that sanctuary knew was that this wasn't just a tragic act of maternal despair. No, this was the final chapter of a deeply twisted saga. A journey that began with a hospital bed, unraveled into the discovery of a horrifying secret, and ended with a daughter found nearly unrecognizable in her childhood bedroom. And here's the part that's truly hard to swallow. Her son wasn't even there to pray. He had come to that church for a reason so dark that, had she not acted, it could have destroyed even more lives. This isn't some cautionary tale about parenting failures. It's a disturbing account of how evil can take root right inside your own home, and how nobody believes the warnings until it's far too late. It all began in the fall of 2020, when Sharon Fields, a school administrative worker from Georgia, was rushed to Fulton Medical Center after collapsing during her shift. Doctors diagnosed her with severe complications from untreated pneumonia and exhaustion. For nearly 3 months, she remained under medical care. During that time, her husband Charles and teenage son Derek only visited on rare occasions, often citing church events or work. But her 21-year-old daughter, Tiana, was there without fail, bringing groceries, asking doctors questions, and making sure her mom never felt alone. When Sharon was finally released and returned home, everything looked the same, but the atmosphere was off. The house was tidy. Meals were prepared. Bills were paid. Yet something deeply unsettling lingered in the air. Charles, once affectionate and involved, now seemed distant and cold. He kept to himself, often vanishing into the garage or spending hours glued to his phone. Derek, now 19, was even more withdrawn, rarely speaking and disappearing for days at a time. Only Tiana seemed to notice the growing shadow creeping over their household. She remembered a time when their family was full of warmth. Movie nights, church on Sundays, and little love notes her father used to leave on the counter. But that man? He didn't exist anymore. Sharon, still fragile from her illness, chalked it up to stress. But what happened next was beyond anything she, or anyone, could have imagined. One quiet Wednesday evening, just 5 weeks after Sharon had come home, Tiana arrived early from her shift at the local diner. Expecting to check on her father, she walked toward the garage. The moment she opened that door, her world cracked open. What she saw wasn't vague, it was graphic, intimate, and horrifying. Her father Charles was physically involved with her brother Derek. No ambiguity, no doubt. She didn't scream, but fled in tears, locking herself in her room, unable to sleep. 3 days passed before she could speak about it. When she finally told her mother, Sharon was devastated. Betrayal didn't begin to describe the weight of what she heard. That evening, Sharon confronted Derek. Charles wasn't home. What followed was not a mother-son moment of healing. Instead, it was cold. Derek, when asked about what Tiana saw, didn't deny it. He spat in his mother's face and walked away, void of guilt or shame. Sharon didn't retaliate. She didn't yell. She just wiped her face and retreated to her room. From that night forward, peace left the home for good. Conversations dwindled. Emotions hardened. Charles stayed out longer. Derek became more arrogant. Sharon and Tiana grew silent. The warmth they once had was replaced with a suffocating tension. Then came the divorce. Sharon filed the paperwork in silence. No announcement. No explanation to friends, family, or even the church community. Just a quiet departure. She and Tiana packed up and moved into a small apartment in DeKalb County. It wasn't much, but it was far from Charles and Derek. Meanwhile, back in their old neighborhood, Charles twisted the narrative. He told anyone who asked that Sharon had changed after her hospital stay, that she had become distant and unfaithful. The church believed him. Derek backed him up. Tiana became the confused daughter, and Sharon, the loyal wife who had endured years of deceit, was painted as the villain. In the silence of their new apartment, Tiana's anger boiled. Her mother refused to expose the truth, insisting it was too twisted and dangerous. And so the darkness continued unchecked. Charles and Derek, emboldened by their secrecy, maintained their relationship behind closed doors. With Sharon gone, there was no one left to challenge it. No eyes watching. No voice of reason. Just a sinister connection growing stronger by the day. But karma, as always, was waiting. One night, Derek attended a party. Alcohol, strangers, escorts, just another reckless evening. One of those encounters would bring back consequences neither of them saw coming. Months later, Charles fell ill. A routine health check revealed he was HIV positive. There had been no affairs, no infidelity, only Derek. The realization was like a bomb going off in his mind. When Derek tested positive too, the horror could no longer be ignored. Charles snapped. He confronted Derek with a firearm in hand, rage replacing all reason. But instead of shooting, he hesitated, perhaps out of fear or shame or sheer disbelief. Derek fled barefoot into the night. And while the gun wasn't fired that evening, the damage had already been done. Their dark secret had destroyed them both, and that was only the beginning of the end. Derek never went back home. For several days, he drifted from one friend's place to another, crashing on couches wherever he could. But once word spread about his diagnosis, those doors quietly closed. Nobody wanted the responsibility, and sympathy quickly dried up. He was out on his own. The house he once called home had become hostile, and the streets now offered no comfort. With no money, no shelter, and nowhere else to turn, Derek reached out to the one person he thought might listen: his sister, Tiana. He flooded her inbox with messages. At first, she ignored him. Then came the calls. She picked up once, let him speak, but said nothing in return. It wasn't until he left a sobbing voicemail, saying he was sleeping in a public park, that she finally said something, to their mother. Sharon was unmoved at first. Her answer was brief, firm, and final: no. She hadn't forgotten who he was, the son who had spat in her face, lied about her character, and defended the man she had divorced in silence. But Derek kept calling, this time directly to her. His voice wavered. He didn't ask for forgiveness, just a warm place to sleep. No excuses. No explanations. Just desperation. After several days of indecision, Sharon called Tiana into the living room and gave her verdict. He could stay, but there would be rules. He was not to enter Tiana's room. No visitors. No loud music. No attitude. 1 week only. That was the deal. He arrived carrying a single duffel bag, eyes lowered, avoiding both women as he stepped inside. There was no spare bedroom, so they gave him an air mattress near the living room wall. The silence between them was suffocating. Tiana said nothing. Sharon barely acknowledged him beyond the house rules. But at least, for the moment, he wasn't homeless. Meanwhile, Sharon had begun spending more time away, often staying overnight with Dr. Vincent Cole, the physician who had helped oversee her care after her hospitalization. Their connection had deepened, turning late-night calls into weekends together. Dr. Cole, a widowed father whose adult son was away at college, found comfort in Sharon's resilience. The time they spent together was the most peace Sharon had felt in years. But in her pursuit of healing, she overlooked the growing danger in her absence. Back at the apartment, the air grew thick with unease. Derek kept to himself, but the tension lingered in every quiet moment. Tiana never let her guard down. She didn't trust him, and for good reason. Unknown to her, Derek had been watching, observing her routines, paying attention to her habit. What she didn't know was that her carefully guarded secret was no longer safe. Tiana had been working 2 jobs for nearly 8 months. One during the day as a cashier, and another at a diner deep into the night. Her goal was simple: to save enough money to finally move out. She loved her mother, but she needed her own space, her own peace. She kept her savings hidden, not in a bank, but stashed inside a heavy metal lockbox buried deep beneath old sheets and shoeboxes in her closet. In just over half a year, she had saved nearly $3,800, all in cash. She never told anyone, not her coworkers, not her friends, not even Sharon. But someone found out. No one knows for sure how long Derek had known about the money. Maybe he noticed the pattern. Maybe he snooped. But on one particular night, while Sharon was away at Dr. Cole's and Tiana was working the late shift, Derek broke into her room. He rifled through her belongings, disturbed the carefully folded sheets, and walked out with the lockbox. It was gone by the time she got home. Days later, investigators would piece together the trail of how the money was spent. Surveillance footage and witness accounts confirmed that Derek had gone on a spree, hopping between private rentals and hotel rooms across Stone Mountain, Lithonia, and Tucker. The stolen money funded a week-long run of escort services and reckless indulgence. But as shocking as the theft was, it wasn't the end. It was just the spark. That Thursday evening, after a long shift at the diner, Tiana returned home. Sharon was gone for the night. The apartment was quiet, until it wasn't. Neighbors would later say they heard shouting. But what actually happened in that room would only become clear after the fact, through evidence recovered, injuries examined, and a horrifying video left behind. Unbeknownst to anyone, Derek had set up a recording device in the bedroom. The footage that investigators later retrieved showed Tiana being attacked. He overpowered her, tore her clothes, and physically assaulted her with brutal force. She fought back, screamed, but was met with repeated blows. At one point, her head collided with the edge of the dresser. Her movements slowed. The screams faded. And then, she stopped fighting altogether. The recording ended just as abruptly as it had begun. 20 agonizing minutes of unthinkable violence. When Sharon returned home 2 days later, the stench hit her before she even opened the door. She called emergency services, her voice shaking. Paramedics arrived to find Tiana's body partially covered, bruised, and lifeless. She had clearly been gone for over a day. Derek was nowhere to be found. His belongings? Gone. The air mattress deflated. No note. No trace. He had vanished like a shadow. Tiana had spent her final days planning for a future, one with freedom, peace, and her own place. But her life was taken in the very room where she had once hidden her dreams. The person responsible wasn't a stranger. He was someone she once shared birthday cakes and family photos with. Her own brother. By Sunday morning, a full-scale manhunt was underway. Authorities combed through Derek's digital footprint, social accounts, phone records. But everything was silent. No online activity. No bank trail. He had disappeared completely. The coroner's report confirmed the worst. Tiana died from blunt force trauma to the head. The secondary injuries revealed something even darker. The footage left no doubt. Derek Fields was now the most wanted man in the state. And Sharon? She fell into a hollowed silence, numb, broken, and utterly alone. Sharon stopped functioning in any recognizable way. She wasn't eating. She couldn't sleep. And when she spoke, it was barely more than a whisper. In the days following Tiana's death, extended family members came in to clear out the apartment. Sharon, numb and hollow, moved in temporarily with Vincent, the man who had quietly become her emotional compass. He helped her face the storm, endless questions from detectives, funeral arrangements, paperwork, and legal consultations. But one question haunted everyone involved. How could someone carry out such a brutal crime and then vanish as if swallowed by the earth? That's when the unexpected phone call came. It was a Sunday morning, and Dr. Vincent Cole had just finished a long hospital shift. He was resting in the break room when his phone buzzed. The caller was a college friend now working as a church audio technician in Fulton County. He didn't know the whole story about Sharon's past, but he had seen the news, and he recognized a face sitting quietly in one of the pews. "I think I just saw your girlfriend's son," he said. Third row, left side. Dressed in black. Vincent didn't call the authorities. He called Sharon. When he told her what had just been reported, she didn't ask questions. Instead, she calmly walked into her bedroom, opened a drawer, and removed a registered handgun, a sleek black pistol she had legally acquired years earlier. She placed it in her handbag, zipped it up, and left the apartment in silence. The church was less than a 20-minute drive away. Sharon parked a few blocks away and walked the rest. By the time she slipped in through the side entrance, the service was already underway. The choir was still, the sermon nearly over. Ushers flanked the aisles, and everything seemed ordinary, except for one thing. Third row from the front sat Derek Fields, dressed in a hoodie and jeans, his face thinner, hair longer, but unmistakable. Sharon slid into a pew 2 rows behind him. From her seat, she watched him carefully. His posture, his jawline, the way his shoulders hunched slightly forward. There was no doubt. It was him. She waited. As the pastor wrapped up his message and invited the congregation to prayer, Sharon slowly stood up. She reached into her bag, pulled out the pistol, and in a clear voice called out, "Derek." He turned halfway toward the sound. 2 gunshots rang out, ripping through the silence. Chaos erupted. Screams filled the air. Ushers scrambled. Parishioners dropped to the floor in fear. The choir panicked. But Sharon didn't flinch. She stood motionless, the gun still in her hand, now lowered at her side. Derek collapsed where he stood, shot before he even realized what had happened. She didn't flee. She didn't speak. Police arrived within minutes and arrested her on the spot, right there in the sanctuary. She was taken into custody and held without bail. In the days that followed, investigators retraced Derek's final step. Security footage from a nearby gas station placed him in the area 2 days before the church incident. When authorities searched his belongings, they discovered a small black notebook, filled with scattered thoughts and unsettling phrases. One name was written repeatedly, circled again and again, a young woman from the church choir. Next to it were chilling words. "She gave it to me. She's still singing." Law enforcement concluded that Derek had returned not for reconciliation, but with the intent to confront, or worse, harm, this woman, whom he believed had infected him during a party long ago. Though no specific plan was found, the writings and his past made the threat all too real. Authorities believed another tragedy had been narrowly avoided. Sharon never gave a public statement. She refused interviews. Her lawyer described her as emotionally unreachable, a woman hollowed out by grief and betrayal. When asked privately whether she regretted what she'd done, her answer was quiet but firm. There was no other choice. Back in DeKalb County, Charles Fields remained in the background, sick, withdrawn, and socially exiled. As the truth about his past relationship with his son surfaced, his standing in the church community collapsed. He no longer led Bible studies, no longer gave testimonies, and eventually stopped attending services altogether. The man who once carried himself with pride now moved like a ghost. Tiana Fields was buried in a small ceremony, attended by a few relatives and colleagues. Sharon, detained and awaiting trial, wasn't permitted to be there. Instead, Dr. Cole stood in her place, offering a short eulogy. No news crews came. No headlines followed. Just a quiet goodbye for a young woman whose future was stolen. The Fields name, once just another family in the neighborhood, had become a whispered tragedy. A name people no longer spoke aloud. What happens when secrets fester in silence? When the danger is inside the home, disguised as love. When the warning signs are ignored until it's too late. Now Derek was gone. Tiana was buried. Charles had disappeared into shame. And Sharon, who once held the family together with quiet strength, sat behind bars, alone, devastated, and broken. Nothing remained of the life she had tried to preserve. Only silence and the haunting question: how many tragedies begin not with chaos, but with secrets no one wants to confront?